know the role of cultural heritage in humanitarian disasters, both as an instrument for resolution, as well as a victim, is increasingly being recognized. And we hope that this event is a clear recognition of this fact. What we call cultural heritage, which does not only include monuments, but also photographs, songs, religious beliefs, recipes, memorabilia, and so on, is an essential contributor to individual and collective identity. But it's also a key for the connection of a local community with its land. It is what makes a local community local. The destruction of the fabric of cultural heritage helps eliminate faster that connection, and therefore eliminates the possibility of return of people to their land, to their life. It renders the damage of war permanent. Because cultural heritage is not a renewable resource. It's as simple as that. So today we, the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Heritage Management Organization that I represent, have the tremendous privilege to have with us a host of European actors that we want to highlight as a potential model of disaster management that Europe is strong at. This initiative that the Greek Foreign Minister is promoting may be a great pathway forward for showing that Europe is and has been for more than 70 years a union of peace with respect to human rights and human prosperity. Of course, we cannot cover all aspects of this challenge on the before, during, and after a humanitarian crisis, but we should highlight some of the elements that will be discussed. And here we have a fabulous roster of activists from the state private, and the private sector. So we suggest that initiatives need to take place in several of the following areas, and we're going to hear from our speakers and our discussants about many of these issues. So when it comes to preparedness, heritage can be seen, it should be seen as a great inspiration for conflict prevention mechanisms in more than one ways. As key educational content, for example, ensuring that the calamities of conflict, war, genocide are clearly explained, as ways of connection between conflicting parties, and as traditional mechanisms for reconciliation and conflict prevention. Community engagement is necessary to ensure that local communities appreciate their local heritage, understand its value for their well-being, and become positive stakeholders for its protection, even in cases that their personal beliefs or personal identity does not coincide with the social groups associated with that heritage. And I'm talking about minorities here. Must also look at how legal instruments, which are generally lacking teeth, become more robust to include sanctions to countries that willingly or negligently destroy cultural heritage. Must think about capacity building programs to ensure that local stakeholders can contribute much to that work, civil or state, but also become more efficient in a potential crisis. There is a broad consensus of that need. We must look at military preparedness so that military units know to respect cultural heritage in areas that they are protecting or attacking. Again, there is some progress, but more needs to be done. Now, during a conflict, during a crisis, we need to have a coordination of agencies and information sharing with tried nodes of information, as well as alternative channels, so that there is no chaos in the management of aid. The current war in Ukraine has shown a willingness towards that development, but also that there is a long and arduous way towards achieving this goal. We should also be thinking about a quick effort to curtail the access of clandestine networks in a conflicted country that would destroy and trade heritage of art illegally, and that appropriate legal, civil society, and state instruments exist to minimize their effect. We must think about the creation of open resources on emergency preparedness so that easy access can be given to local institutions in times of need. And finally, for this part, for managing conflict, that emergency funds are available to make quick amends and accelerate emergency preparedness and safeguarding of heritage. Now, after the effect, managing the wounds of conflict and thinking about a path towards development, Civil society, private foundations, state and intergovernmental actors must collaborate for heritage restitution and reconstruction. Again, capacity building programs to ensure that state sector and civil society can stand again on their feet and plan their way ahead. And in order for them to collaborate locally and internationally, making heritage a part of the solution of development ahead. So these capacity programs must be in place. And for this, we must make a special mention to the capacity of heritage to create sustainable economic development, as we did in a recent event that highlighted the powerful tool that heritage can be in that respect, especially in a war-torn environment. And finally, we need a better coordination between grant giving, capacity building, and hands-on organizations in the field. Now, all of these initiatives that need to be done are represented more or less in this event. And our collaboration with almost all organizations here is a given, and our commitment for the continuation of this initiative is also guaranteed. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency, the Greek Foreign Minister, Mr. Nikos Dendias, who, for many personal and institutional reasons, has a great interest in our initiative and event. Your Excellency, Mr. Dendias.
This is exactly why Greece has taken the initiative to organize this humanitarian talk. Our aim is to highlight the potential role of the protection of cultural heritage in preventing and mitigating humanitarian crises. Images of people struggling to protect cultural assets have recently reached news outlets from Ukraine. Similarly, images from the deliberate destruction of the Buddhas of Bamiyan in Afghanistan haunt us since 2001. What we have been witnessing is the weaponization of the destruction of cultural heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to protect cultural heritage, which is enshrined in international humanitarian law as a fundamental driver of social resilience and development. Therefore, we are to advocate for its inclusion in emergency response and humanitarian relief systems. Furthermore, there is an immense pressure on available resources for humanitarian action at the current juncture. For this reason, we need to turn to new and innovative sources of funding. This includes calling upon the private sector to contribute to this effort. In Greece, we're embarking upon an open, constructive public dialogue on these issues with the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event proves our strong commitment for further deepening our cooperation with other European Union member states and the Commission. It proves also our support for the inclusion of the cultural heritage protection in the emergency response and humanitarian relief systems. In this regard, we believe that a relative Team Europe initiative should also be developed. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now we will start with our three speakers. And first, I must introduce Mrs. Artemis Papathanasiou, who is a senior legal advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Greece and a member of the Committee for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict, of which she was president from 2014 to 16, and of the UNESCO Committee for Promoting the Return of Cultural Property to its country of origin or its restitution in case of illicit appropriation, which she chaired between 2011 and 12. Artemis is the legal voice of our team today that will highlight the gaps in the current system. Artemis. Your microphone. Your microphone, Artemis. Artemis, your microphone.
Yes. Thank you, Vangelis. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, over the last few years, violence against cultural heritage has become a prominent feature of conflicts. We have witnessed it in Syria, Iraq, Mali, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. This violence takes various forms. Deliberate attacks against monuments with no military value as a tactic of war, military operations against emblematic cultural properties that have turned into military objectives, and even the destruction of cultural objects as incidental damage or as acts of sheer vandalism. Unfortunately, we are currently witnessing the commission of severe damages to Ukrainian cultural properties, with also World Heritage being under threat in the context of the ongoing military operation against Ukraine. It would also be a remiss of me not to mention that the collateral damage of the said conflicts is the looting of antiquities and their illicit trafficking and trade by terrorist groups in order to use them as a source of financing. Protection of cultural heritage in armed conflict is governed by international humanitarian law. The pertinent rules are found in customary international law and treaty law. The centerpiece of the relevant treaty law is the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict, together with its two protocols. The Hague Convention contains a definition of cultural property that covers both movable and immovable cultural property of great importance to the cultural heritage of every people, as well as museums, large libraries, and depositories of archives. It further creates a specific emblem, the blue shield, to identify protected cultural property and provides for a system of general and special protection of cultural property. As for respect to cultural property, this includes refraining from using cultural property in a way likely to expose it to destruction or damage, and refraining from acts of hostility directed against such property. Unfortunately, this obligation was watered down by the insertion of a waiver, where military necessity imperatively requires such a waiver. Therefore, if imperative military necessity justifies an attack on cultural property, such an attack would not violate the Hague Convention. The Convention was adopted together with its first protocol, aiming at preventing the export of cultural property from occupied territory and requiring the return of such property to the territory of the state from which it was removed. That leads me to say in passing, in the context of the ongoing armed conflict in Ukraine, that since both Russia and Ukraine are contracting parties to the first protocol to the Hague Convention, the occupying power must ensure that cultural property is not exported from the conflict zone it occupies. The same goes for third states parties to the first protocol, which must, should such property end up in their territory, take the property into their custody and return it to the country of origin at the close of hostilities. In addition to its protection under the Hague Convention and the two protocols of 1954 and 1999, cultural property in armed conflict is also specifically protected by Protocols 1 and 2 of 1977, additional to the Geneva Conventions of 1949 for the protection of war victims. Further, cultural property in armed conflict is specifically protected as well by the Statute of the International Criminal Court, which in its Article 8 states that intentionally directing attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes, provided they are not military objectives, constitutes a war crime regardless of the classification of the conflict. Coming back to the Hague Convention, the difficulty in it has always been determining what exactly constitutes an imperative military necessity. The international community recognized this shortcoming and sought to rectify it in a second protocol additional to the Convention, the 1999 Second Protocol, which clarified, among others, that the waiver is only available where the property has become a military objective by its function and there is no feasible alternative to attacking it. In this context, allow me to open again a parenthesis regarding the ongoing armed conflict in Ukraine and say that both Russia and Ukraine are parties to the Hague Convention and the First Protocol. But while Ukraine is a party to the Second Protocol, Russia is not. As a consequence, in the relations between Russia and Ukraine applies only the problematic, if I may use the term, waiver for imperative military necessity of the Hague Convention with all the effects that it might imply. The new elements introduced by the 1999 Second Protocol are the following. The broadening of the scope of application of the protection, since it contains a specific chapter on its application in armed conflicts not of an international character. This is very important if one considers that modern conflicts have drastically changed over the last few years with the introduction of new actors in conflict zones, such as transnational armed terrorist groups. And the main issue here is that international humanitarian law needs to evolve further to comprehensively adapt to these new dynamics. The establishment of a new system of protection of cultural property, the enhanced protection, is another new development, which is a sort of immunity enjoyed by a specific cultural property as well as its immediate surroundings in armed conflict. Another element of the second protocol is the criminalization of specific acts against cultural property committed intentionally and in violation of the Convention or the Protocol. The specification also of the obligation for the safeguarding of cultural property in time of peace by taking preparatory measures, not only in the event of an armed conflict, but equally for the protection of cultural property in the event of unforeseeable natural disasters. Now let's go to the recent developments in the context of the protection of cultural heritage in armed conflict. First, the introduction of a new distinctive emblem for property under enhanced protection for raising awareness of the military. Second, the conviction in 2016 by the International Criminal Court of Ahmed al-Faki al-Mahdi for war crimes related to the targeted destruction of protected cultural heritage in Mali under Article 8 of the ICC statute. This was the first case related to destruction of cultural heritage handled by the ICC. And for your information, the prosecutor of the ICC has recently initiated an investigation regarding the situation in Ukraine following referrals by a considerable number of states. Third, the adoption by UNESCO of a strategy for the reinforcement of the organization's actions for the protection of culture and the promotion of cultural pluralism in the event of armed conflict, followed by an action plan for its implementation through strengthening member states' ability to prevent, mitigate, and recover the loss of cultural heritage and diversity as a result of conflict, and incorporating the protection of culture into humanitarian action and peace-building processes, including integration of these elements in UN peacekeeping operations. A new thematic aiming at heritage protection through conflict prevention, dispute resolution, restitution, and rehabilitation is already underway. Another major development is the launching of the Military Manual on the Protection of Cultural Property in Armed Conflict. The Military Manual, launched by UNESCO in 2016, is the first international training tool of this kind and combines a military-focused account of the relevant international legal obligation of states and individuals with suggestions for the different levels of command and during the different phases of military operations, whether by land, sea, or air. Other development is the adoption by the Security Council of Resolution 2347 of 2017, which has been a very important development because for the first time the Security Council adopted a resolution exclusively devoted to the targeted destruction of cultural heritage in armed conflict areas and its collateral damages without necessarily focusing on the financing of terrorism. The Security Council condemns in the strongest possible terms the unlawful destruction of cultural heritage in conflict situations, and most importantly, introduces the concept of safe havens for movable cultural property in danger and encourages member states to take preventing measures to safeguard their state-owned cultural property in a network of safe havens in their own territories. The establishment of synergies between the 1954 Hague Convention and the UNESCO Convention on the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, with the aim to protect the intangible cultural heritage in time of armed conflict, including occupation. Ladies and gentlemen, during armed conflicts, the intangible cultural heritage is damaged as well. When groups of people or entire communities are forced to move, the damage to their traditions and customs, whether religious or cultural, is immeasurable. And a reasonable question raises here. Given that the respective Convention on the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage applies only in time of peace, is the intangible cultural heritage protected in times of war and conflict? The answer must be sought within the context of the international human rights law. In this context, it is noteworthy, and this is a very positive development, although a soft law one, that the Human Rights Council, in its Resolution 43/9 of 2020, reaffirmed that cultural rights are an integral part of human rights, which are universal, indivisible, interrelated, and independent. Further, in its Resolution 37/17, a recent one, it emphatically noted that the violation or abuse of the right of everyone to take part in the enjoyment of cultural heritage may threaten stability, social cohesion, and identity, as constituting an aggravating factor in conflict and a major obstacle to dialogue, peace, and reconciliation, and further welcomed all supporting initiatives, whether by states, institutions, or private persons. I will conclude by underlining that it is significantly important for states and non-state actors as well to understand that protecting people's lives will always remain the highest priority, but respect for a people's dignity is also a crucial consideration during armed conflict, including occupation. The Human Rights Council called for the recognition of the protection of cultural heritage, including in armed conflict, as an important component of humanitarian assistance. While human life is more important than objects, it is nevertheless essential to abide by rules protecting cultural property, as it constitutes the collective memory of humanity and symbolizes human life itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Artemis. This was a very interesting talk, and we go immediately to the next speaker, Mr. Valéry Frelon, who is the Executive Director of ALIF, a great example of a private-public partnership in some ways, that has for 5 years revolutionized the world of heritage reconstruction in areas of conflict. Their experience here is actually most important, not only as a new paradigm, but also as a test case that will teach us how things must be improved in the future. So without much further ado, Valéry.
Thank you, Evangelos. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting ALIF. I'm very pleased to see many friends. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this meeting, especially the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the European Union, and our dear friend Evangelos Kyriakidis. Allow me to share with you my experience in leading ALIF, the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas, since its establishment in Geneva in 2018. So ALIF was created on the initiative of France and the United Arab Emirates in order to have, in the field of heritage protection in conflict zones, an agile instrument ready to respond rapidly to crises. And the choice was thus made to create a private foundation in Geneva and a substantial capital, the result of a public-private partnership. This capital at our disposal is definitely an asset for responsiveness. From our first years, I draw the following observations. First, the destruction of cultural heritage contributes to the emergence or amplification of humanitarian crises. Behind the stones, as we all know, there are women and men. And very often, heritage consists of houses, administrative or cultural buildings, and schools before being cultural heritage, as we saw during the blast in Beirut on August 4, 2020, or as we see today in Ukraine. Some lost a roof, many were traumatized. Beyond that, the loss of cultural heritage can also contribute to migration crisis. The loss of Yazidi or Christian heritage has contributed to the departure of these communities from Iraq in recent years. Can also contribute to security issues. The illicit traffic of cultural goods is the third largest source of financing for terrorism. And more broadly, loss of economic income, especially from tourism, and loss of cultural and religious pluralisms, and therefore democratic values. The second point I wanted to mention is that this issue, the issue of cultural heritage protection, is not behind us, but ahead of us. Indeed, in the last 30 years, and with the Balkan War, we have witnessed an increase in the significance of this issue. The destruction of heritage is no longer the sole act of Islamic terrorism. It is now illustrated by other intra or interstate conflicts, such as between Azerbaijan and Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh, in Ethiopia over Tigray, or today in Ukraine. The instrumentalization of heritage is increasing. It can become collateral damage. It can be a target of war, and also sometimes used as a weapon of war, as sadly illustrated by the media coverage of the destruction by Daesh. Why is this so? undoubtedly, because heritage is a marker of identity in a globalized world with weakened identities. What is striking about the Ukrainian crisis is that heritage is one of the issues that the media is addressing the most, even though it is not as clear that it is being instrumentalized as it was with Daesh. This is probably because everyone, including Ukrainians, recognizes its exceptional character. So my first recommendation for national and European authorities is that the protection of cultural heritage must be one of the priorities of humanitarian and development aid policies. It is essential for limiting the impact of a crisis and also for recovery. Third remarks, any humanitarian crisis requires a coordinated, reactive, and concrete response, and the protection of heritage is no exception to this rule. A coordinating reaction. This is, of course, necessary, and it is usually the role of UN organization or of EU or of national authorities, as it was the case after the explosion in Beirut, where the Director General of Antiquities played a central role. It is necessary to work together, and this is not always a given. And this coordination can naturally go beyond that of actors in the same sector. For example, wouldn't it be better to coordinate with the humanitarian and heritage sectors? Brussels or Geneva could play a key role in this. We also need a great agility and reactivity. In this respect, it seems important to me that the task can be divided between the institutions that are not able to intervene quickly for various reasons, notably administrative constraints, and those that have the capacity to make decisions quickly and have the financial means to implement them. This is, in the field of cultural heritage protection, one of ALIF's main assets, because we are a structure with a light governance and solid funds. We were thus among the first to effectively finance projects of stabilization of historic houses in Beirut, along with our friends from Prince Claus Fund, as we are the first to concretely protect museums in Ukraine today. Finally, the responses must be more focused on concrete, on-the-ground action. In this respect, it is unanimously shared within the governance of ALIF to act as concretely as possible, summarized by our motto, action, action, action. And this is what we try to do in Ukraine with direct financial support or help to museums and professionals. To that, ALIF has concretely supported more than 30 Ukrainian museums to protect their collection in the west and the south of the country, and has also contributed to send them protection material, as you can see on the picture behind me. Finally, two dimensions seem to me to be crucial for resolving humanitarian crises, including heritage crisis. Prevention. This is already one of the lessons of the Ukrainian crisis in the area of heritage protection. Ukrainian professionals are excellent and show incredible courage. However, it seems that the means of protection are lacking. Boxes, extinguishers, etc. Shouldn't we contribute to the supply of this type of material prior to a conflict in areas under tension? This is what ALIF has started to answer, for example, by better preparing museums to face crises, as we have done in Abidjan, for instance, with the Museum of Civilization of the Ivory Coast in 2019-2020. Finally, the role of local actors, local population and communities is crucial. At ALIF, we are keen to rely on them, their expertise, their know-how, their commitment, without however prohibiting us from resorting to external international actors. In this case, it is important that they are fully integrated into the local environment in order to contribute to the transfer of knowledge and know-how around concrete projects. Because local communities and actors are the guarantors of sustainable protection of heritage, of the resilience of societies in the face of crisis. So to summarize my remarks, I would say that the protection of heritage must now be better taken into account in humanitarian and development policies, because cultural heritage can play a key role in the process of emerging from crisis and reconstruction. And in crisis, we need agile and reactive instruments like ALIF. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valerie. It is actually great to see our partners here contributing their wisdom from their side. And it is actually very important to take stock of your experience and take it further And I think this is a good point to introduce the next two speakers, Isber Sabrin and René Treijweger, who have been working for many years on, well, actually, both of them independently have worked many years in the field, but more recently have worked together in an organization called Heritage for Peace, which specializes in heritage conflict management and prevention, in a way. And they have actually also been conducting relevant research, the finds of which I hope they will share today. I think Isber is starting. And then, yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Evangelos, for organizing this. And also I would like to thank the Foreign Ministry in Greek to take care of this issue. So it's my pleasure to be with you all and to present our experience. And also, I would like to give some lesson learned from our experience with some recommendation. I am talking here as a president and co-founder of Heritage for Peace. Heritage for Peace is a non-government organization based in Spain. It was founded in 2013. And actually, our mission from the start was concentrated in order to help and support our colleagues in conflict areas in their efforts to protect cultural heritage. And from the beginning of our work, we do believe that cultural heritage and the protection of cultural heritage is a very important tool to make dialogue and also to enhance peace during conflict and in post-conflict. So our work from the beginning of our foundation, it was concentrated in several actions. First, it was concentrated in research and also raising awareness on the destruction of cultural heritage during conflict. So especially our work was concentrated in Middle East and in Syria in the beginning. And actually also in this regard, we were working in order to research the illicit traffic as well of cultural properties during conflict. Especially recently, we conducted research to show how Islamic State as well was involving heritage in their action, and also how they used heritage to finance their terrorism actions. On the other hand, and with the support of Ali Foundation, we were since 2 years working in the empowering of civil society organization, especially in Arab region. And we created an initiative. It's called ANJ, Arab Network of Civil Society Organization to Safeguard Cultural Heritage, which it's concentrated in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya. And with this initiative, we can see how really very important the empowering civil society in actions and link civil society as well to the efforts of the protection of cultural heritage. Another also point that we are concentrating is using heritage to and making the linking between heritage and refugees. So, and for this reason, we have two initiatives. The first one is ABWAB, which is an cultural initiative in Spain we created in order to help refugees to integrate through cultural heritage. So basically, we organize museum tours in order to bring refugees to museums and to show them as well the cultural heritage of the host country, and also to create action between the host country and the host country and the refugee on cultural heritage. So we do need that the local Europeans know more about the heritage of the newcomers. So this is also heritage enhance as well the intercultural dialogue between culture. On the other hand, also we created initiatives for the Palmyrene, the people from Palmyra. We know all of us about the tragedy of Palmyra and how it was destroyed by ISIS. So also with the generous support of Alif, we with local in Palmyra, we create Palmyrene Voices, which is an initiative to help refugees from Syria based in Turkey to create income-generating projects based on cultural heritage, so especially handicrafts. Also, in the recent years, and from our funding, we are working on implementation projects in the ground, and these projects in situ, especially in conflict. So, in these projects, we worked in order to do capacity building, training, and also to implement heritage protection projects, conservation and rehabilitation projects, especially emergency interventions. So now we have since 2 years with a Cultural Protection Fund support of the British Council, we are working in the city of Raqqa, which was the ex-capital of Islamic State. So in this project, we try to document and also to implement emergency action for heritage. So basically, our work now is concentrated in all of these 4 pillars. From our work, actually, I would like just to share what it should be done and what are the recommendations from our experience. So from our experience, we do believe working on fostering the networking between heritage workers and local communities and international community is very crucial, especially not just during conflict, before conflict, during conflict, and in post-conflict. And actually, for this reason, we see how, and now from the Ukrainian crisis, we see that our Ukrainian colleagues were this situation was very new for them. So we do need really to, and this is a call to the public institution, EU also public institution, to empower and to take care and to think about how we should invest more in civil society organization. So this is very crucial. The second point which I would like to address is how we should work as well to bring heritage to education, and especially with refugees. I mean, and this is very important. Now, in Syria, we had all these years like 10 million refugees, and a lot of them, like 4 or 5 million, are outside Syria. So from this, we learned that education for heritage, for especially children, is very important. And we need to use heritage as a tool to heal. And people who are affected by conflict, especially children who were really very affected, and they need and heritage and make existing between their culture and help them to get more psychological support. The third point, which I would like to recommend, is also use heritage for peace building. And we learned that within conflict, there is a lot of tension between ethnic groups. There is a lot of difficulties. So working on the protection of heritage during conflict between ethnic groups help to increase peace, and also the use of heritage in a sustainable way. So, other point which I want to address is humanitarian, integrating humanitarian aid as well to heritage protection. We know from our experience that really heritage is a need, should be integrated to the humanitarian action. We have several examples, and really we do need to think how all the humanitarian aid agencies could contribute in their work in the ground on the protection of cultural heritage. I would like to conclude that based on this experience and with the partnership with the Prince Claus Fund, the Cultural Emergency Initiative for initiative from the Prince Claus Fund, we were working since now 5 months in order to set a hub This hub, it will on heritage and peace building, and it will be a hub in which, like advocacy center, we would like from, and we are working to advocate institution on the protection of cultural heritage and on the aim to bring heritage and humanitarian aid together and peace building. So we are now working on that. Since 5 months, we are working on research. Hopefully, very soon we will publish a white paper to address all of these issues connecting heritage to peace building, connecting heritage to disaster, and heritage to humanitarian actions. So still a lot of work, and I hope that the institutions in Europe and the European Commissions, they will be working on this recommendation. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Isber. Immediately, let's go to René, because we have run over time. René, can you unmute yourself?
I was too quick. Good afternoon. Let me just continue on a little bit more abstract level that me as a co-founder for Heritage for Peace will present our ideas. Based on our lessons learned, I want to ask all authorities to, first, integrate their public policies on heritage risk management in all phases of crisis with the risk management policies of the CSOs, civil society organizations, and with the public and private policies on risk management for humanitarian crisis, which has been mentioned before, as well as those of natural hazards. Why heritage? Heritage is about people. It is much less on the stones or tradition, because people are the ones who make heritage, who produce heritage. They decide what for them is heritage. And it is people who defend their heritage in times of crisis. After all, they are the first responders. In any type of crisis, peoples are lost. They do not know what to do. Families and communities are threatened to disintegrate. In short, social cohesion is at risk, while in a crisis situation, people and communities need each other more than ever. And this is where heritage can play an important role. People and communities in stress will need to fall back on social and cultural relations that are familiar to them. When the expressions of the familiar, something they can hold on to, and that is part of their identity, when that is lost, people and communities are lost. The destruction and damage of iconic and historic buildings, like places of worship, monuments, and other points of heritage reference, like museums, libraries, and archives, when that is, it is affecting the people more and the communities more than we ever think. To protect and safeguard is to stimulate and restore a human resilience. This is one point where heritage emergency aid connects to natural disasters and humanitarian crisis. Now, what other relations are there between heritage and humanitarian crisis? There is a clear shift in humanitarian action today to connect more and better to local communities. In the recent COVID-19 pandemic, CSOs could reach those in need quickly, while humanitarians could not. Civil societies have built up tight relations with local communities over years and have intricate networks of local CSOs. In our work, we did not only set up guidelines for the protection of heritage during the pandemic, but include paragraphs on personal and mental health, disinformation, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. Our heritage colleagues also need humanitarian support. They are people, after all. And we could refer them to the nearest in-country organizations that could provide that aid. Both heritage aid and humanitarian aid professionals can supplement each other. In the present crisis in Ukraine, we have a hard time getting our heritage aid, like conservation materials and firefighting equipment, across the border to Ukraine, so we asked our humanitarian colleagues to help us out. The general problem, actually, is that the general problem that the humanitarian sector is facing is that heritage is not considered as a basic need, but a luxury. And this has to change. Governments can support us by accepting the heritage CSOs as a partner and to help us to coordinate, cooperate, and communicate with our humanitarian colleagues and thus include us in their risk management policies. We have a lot to offer. What are the relations between heritage and natural hazards? A natural hazard, like a humanitarian crisis or a violent conflict, does not appear suddenly but have histories. In reality, of course, they suddenly appear, but often communities have stories of natural hazards, stories passed on from one generation to the other. And those memories are expressed in immaterial heritage like dance, theater, norms, traditions, and immaterial heritage as well, in adapting the construction of their traditional homes, religious buildings, and their living habits, and even their local landscape. These social and cultural practices should be included in risk preparedness, enhancing community resilience, and also in post disaster aid. As the heritage sector, we have that knowledge. For example, rebuilding houses after the 2019 tsunami in Aceh. Houses were built with indoor kitchens and toilets and no place for the kettle under the house. Essential mistakes according to the inhabitants. Another point is what the risk management priorities are for the local communities. And they often do not agree with the authorized heritage discourse. Frequently, communities, after building their homes, not houses, there is a difference, put restoring their often ancient religious buildings and sacred religious sites on the second place. That is where they come together to meet, to grieve, to seek support, and to pray and perform religious ceremonies, to beg the gods for help and assistance. Heritage Age experts in the CSOs first listen to the wishes of local communities and next address their needs and act accordingly. This is the strength of heritage CSOs. But we can also learn from disaster professionals as they are way ahead in risk preparedness, like early warning systems. Now, integrating CSO in public heritage risk management policies in all phases of a natural hazard is essential and in our mutual interest. Again, I ask governments to include CSOs in their the risk management policies for natural hazards. And I repeat myself, we have a lot to offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, René and Isber. Thank you, in fact, to all the three institutions that spoke so far. And now we want to have a little dialogue, let's say, with two discussants. And I will start immediately by presenting the first, a dear friend and colleague from a partner institution, the Prince Claus Fund for Culture and Development, which is slowly being transformed into the Cultural Emergency Response Program. San Lachert, the head of the Cultural Emergency Response Program, and which actually provides first aid to cultural heritage in case of conflict and disaster, so very topical, by providing quick relief to stabilize the situation, evacuate objects when possible, or document. CER, which is currently becoming an independent foundation. So we actually have a very interesting case of a state or close to state institution, which is becoming a private institution, is actively engaged in 3 continents, namely in Yemen, Kenya, Haiti, Guatemala, and Lebanon. So San.
Thank you, Evangelos, for this nice introduction, and thanks all speakers also for the nice contributions. And I've been listening a bit, and I think I agree with almost every recommendation that has been given. And based on our experience and work, I try to find a gap a little bit, as you will, and see where I can still offer a contribution from our experience. So as Evangelos said, is that we've been protecting culture in crisis since 2003. So that's providing fast and flexible financial support and expertise to local partners on the ground in crisis situations. And we really do that because we believe that culture is a basic need. So the loss of culture is a damage and a permanent loss for affected communities. So I always like to say that we're not just a heritage preservation organization, but our work is really about people and providing continuity to culture and identity after crisis. So in the past 20 years, almost, we have supported over 500 projects in 82 different countries. And I feel that we have a pretty clear overview of the field and what the needs are on the ground. So what we can do on the ground is absolutely true and needed. We need to support urgent first aid to cultural heritage under threat. And there's definitely an advantage to do that through civil society organizations who have close links to the ground, as Alif also pointed out. So we can make small grants that can be made available very quickly in crisis situations without the difficult, sometimes time-consuming processes that need for decision making. But we can also be very flexible and easily adapt to the needs on the ground because we're in such close contact with a strong and trusted network of local partners on the ground all over the world. But there's another focus that I see there's a need to focus on and work together, and I really think there's also an opportunity to do that closer with the humanitarian sector, is that we need to invest in the infrastructure to provide this kind of first aid. So there's an urgent need to prepare for crisis in peacetime, so we can actually provide this quick and adequate response. And this is not only an opportunity to work with civil society actors, but also with other stakeholders that have already been mentioned. There's other first responders, but also civil protection, governments, and other defense actors, militaries, etc. So we have a couple of best practices in which that can be done. So we organize international interdisciplinary training where first aiders for cultural heritage work closely with other first aiders, not only to actually learn hands-on experience on how to provide this cultural first aid, but also how can we work together between different types of actors in a crisis situation? How can we create deployable teams that have expertise of everything that's needed to protect culture in crisis times? But I also think we should take another step and really strengthen the infrastructure on the ground in areas where this needs most. So long-term collaborations with local actors, and we are creating regional hubs to coordinate emergency response, but also to provide on-the-ground training that's adapted to regional needs and integrate culture in regional mechanisms and legislation. So we see the added value of this type of approach really after Lebanon, after explosion, but also now in Ukraine, where we could not have moved so quickly if we hadn't had the key actors already in place on the ground to provide that first aid and coordinate that response. Secondly, this also will make the field more inclusive, where local actors are in the lead and can define priorities and formulate that response more independent from external drivers. So I really see an opportunity here to work together, to create this interdisciplinary deployable teams, to coordinate response between different actors, but also to advocate for the integration of culture in mechanisms that already exist. Like Renee just pointed out, we really need the help and collaboration of the humanitarian sector to actually get materials, for example, into Ukraine at this moment in time. So I really see the need to have this conversation. And if I'm really honest with you, this has been a challenge to get culture a seat at the table at humanitarian conversations. And we do really see that this is needed because in these years of time, we've already really seen the impact of the loss of heritage. And this is really why I've been advocating for the recognition of culture as a humanitarian issue and a better integration in these relief efforts that already exist. And I think that it's a joint conversation that we should have, because that's already been pointed out. In the end, the work that we all do is about people. And I think in culture that comes together. And as one of our partners in Lebanon also said after the explosion, it really makes a difference between living and being alive. And I really do believe that this is where our sectors can find each other. And I do hope we can work together to make this case and see how we can actually work together. But then I also have a question for you, for the humanitarian fields. How do we get that seat at the table, and what do you need from us to make this case? How can we work together, and where do you see the linking aspects and linking pins to make sure that we can work together in a coordinated way to protect culture and people in a crisis situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Sana. This is really brilliant. Thank you for your remarks, which are very well taken. And now let's go to our last discussant, Peter Kovacs-Pivka, who is the CEO of Hungary Helps Agency, and so therefore a state organization that has created actually a dynamic program of reconstruction and restitution in areas of conflict. I know Hungary Helps from their work in Iraq, and it would be very interesting to hear their views. So, Peter.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this whole conference and inviting me for this. So, the Hungary Health Program started, it was launched in 2016 after the defeat of ISIS, and first it was active in Iraq and Syria. And the reason why I'm talking about it, because our first ever program was the reconstruction of a village called Tel Askuf, which is very close to Mosul. It started in 2017, and interestingly, when we asked the local communities what to rebuild first and how to help first, they mentioned it should be the church, because the church is the symbolic and central place of the village, and the church is helping the most in the resilience of the local community. So this is how it started, and at that very early point, we realized that preserving of and rebuilding and reconstructing of the cultural heritage is a key factor of the resilience of the communities and to help the people in need. So that started. We already have more than 50 projects where some type of cultural heritage is involved. So now we are in 2022, and I must say that we have the relevant experience in it. It would be great to preserve, renovate everything. However, we need to realize that it's not possible. So therefore, it is very important to strictly and accurately choose which are the projects which we finance and where we help. We need to see what is the nature of the danger which endangers the cultural heritage on the spot. And there are several factors which we identified. The first is the poverty of the local communities. So sometimes they just cannot really afford to preserve or to renovate a cultural heritage. Sometimes it's the lack of knowledge about how to renovate it. So this provides the space of cooperation between our universities or European institutions of preserving cultural heritage and the local communities, the local groups of professionals. Sometimes there is no willingness to renovate, or sometimes it's exactly the opposite. So one group is willing to eliminate the other group's cultural presence in the region, which is tragic. But if you have one group to preserve the heritage, that could be the solution. Or sometimes it is also a factor that there is no possibility to utilize from the cultural heritage. So these are the factors which we take into consideration when we choose, and also if we can work together, the locals, if we have support from the local government or the central government of that country, if it's possible. So for example, not in Syria, but in other countries. That also can help in bilateral diplomacy as well. So, for example, in Iraq, the Hungarian government and the government of Kurdistan is now getting stronger because of our work. One project I would like to talk about, because it shows how we select projects, and is the Crack the Chevalier in Syria. The Crack the Chevalier project is one of the biggest castles in Syria, in the Christian Valley, very close to Homs. I don't know if you have heard of it, but I'm sure yes, because it's a UNESCO World Heritage. And the reason why it is important for the locals, because it provides opportunities from tourism, also from event organization, and it was used for multiple functions before ISIS appeared there and before ISIS occupied the castle. Now it is in danger. A Hungarian group of professionals are working on that together with locals. So they are trying to preserve it and rebuild. So after this work, hopefully the locals can use it again, and it could be a good touristic action again, attraction again, which would be great for the locals because it provides them some income and helps in the resilience of the local community. So this is how we work, and according to what has been said during this conversation, I think that there are a lot of points which are common in our work and in the work of your organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think this is a great time for Mr. Katsaniotis to give some final remarks before we close the today's event.
I would like to commend the organizers and the speakers for this very interesting humanitarian talk. In times of armed conflicts which cause devastating humanitarian crises, it is of particular importance to highlight the role of the private sector, which in coordination with governments, international organizations, and other state actors can play a crucial role in managing the horrendous consequences. Even more so in view of the current global economic challenges, private sector all the more plays a key role contributing in effort to protect, preserve, and strengthen the local identity and culture in humanitarian crisis. This event comes timely as we witness an appalling war unfold in the Ukraine, which caused an enormous humanitarian and refugee crisis. The Greek government has already announced significant contribution in order to help alleviate the situation, the most important being the rebuilding of the bombed maternity hospital in Mariupol. We hope and build on the readiness of the private sector to stand by our side and, most importantly, by the side of the Ukrainian people. Thank you once again. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Minister. Thank you to everyone who has participated. I just close with just two remarks. This event by itself is a proof that heritage should be sitting in the same table with the humanitarian organizations for humanitarian crises. And perhaps it's a great first step of doing so. And second is that no sector, the state sector or the private sector, can stand on its own in such huge challenges as humanitarian disasters. So we must be working together. Organizations from the private sector must be working together, but must also be working together with the state sector and in coordination with the state sector and vice versa, so that we can have better results in a challenge that is asymmetrical to the abilities of every one stakeholder. I give you my personal pledge that this initiative will continue, and I hope to be continuing to work with all of you in the near future in taking good further steps in this current and future humanitarian disasters for the protection of cultural heritage in areas that need it. Thank you all for your participation and looking forward to more.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
you.